Have you ever wondered why the greatest minds in history often lived in loneliness and tragedy? The darkness of intelligence. The originating question, why does genius often go hand in hand with tragedy? Have you ever wondered, why do the greatest minds in history leave behind not only a brilliant intellectual legacy, but also deep spiritual wounds? Nikola Tesla, the genius inventor, ended his life in loneliness in a hotel room, conversing with pigeons as if they were his only kindred friends. Vincent van Gogh, the painter whose eyes saw the colors of the world with unprecedented depth, cut off his own ear and ultimately ended his life in despair. John Nash, the mathematical genius who transformed modern economics, was haunted for decades by invisible voices in his mind. Nietzsche, the giant philosopher of Europe, who warned the world about the death of God and the abyss of nihilism, slid into 11 silent years of madness before leaving this world. Is this merely coincidence, or is there a hidden law? The sharper the intellect, the denser the spiritual darkness? That very question already tastes of philosophy, an obsession with the relationship between the light of thought and the darkness of existence. Perhaps the tragedy of extraordinary minds comes not only from external circumstances, but also from their very inner capacity. Like a sharpened blade, the keener it is, the greater the risk of wounding the very hand that wields it, the price of lucidity. We often praise intelligence, seeing it as the pinnacle of humanity. Yet few notice that the deeper one advances into the world of thought, the easier it becomes to face loneliness. Those of superior intelligence are often misunderstood by society because what they see is often years, even centuries, ahead of their time. Tesla could envision the entire alternating current system, see in his mind the network of wireless transmission. But standing among the crowd, he became an outcast, unable to share those visions with people concerned only with their daily bread. Van Gogh painted light with swirling strokes, as if he could see the invisible breath of the universe. But that overwhelming empathy also tormented him with mental disorders. Nietzsche, in a moment of philosophical awakening, exclaimed, "When you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." That saying is not mere wordplay, but a warning. When intelligence is strong enough to tear apart the layers of illusion to which the masses cling, what remains is only an empty void, where old values vanish and new ones have yet to take shape. In that gap, the human mind easily falls into crisis. In fact, modern research has proven brains with superior cognitive abilities often simultaneously carry tendencies toward anxiety disorders, depression, or inner obsessions. The very sensitivity and excessive connections among brain regions, which create genius, also make it hard for them to be at peace with themselves. But philosophy does not stop at description. It forces us to ask, must the light of intelligence always be paid for with the darkness of the soul? Or does tragedy arise only when we have not yet learned how to live with that very light? Intelligence as a curse. In Greek mythology, there is the image of Prometheus stealing the fire of the gods to give to mankind. That fire brought civilization, but also eternal punishment. Is not superior intelligence itself the Promethean fire within the human mind? The more intelligent a person is, the more they can see through the veil of lies erected by society. But precisely because of this, they lose the mental railings, the simple beliefs that help most of humanity live in peace. For many, religious faith, moral norms, or communal stories act like invisible walls holding the mind steady. But for the highly intelligent, those walls are sooner or later called into question. And when the walls collapse, they stand exposed before the void of truth. Here, intelligence is like a curse. It gives us eyes to see further, but at the same time robs us of the serenity that the less seeing still keep. The intelligent cannot live in innocence, and that loss of innocence is itself the tragedy. Nietzsche once wrote, "The death of God is not only the collapse of a faith, but also the terrifying emptiness when humans are forced to confront a universe with no center, no inherent purpose. That is the abyss, the nihilistic space where absolute values dissolve into dust." And perhaps the suffering of geniuses comes not only from pathology or social circumstance, but from the very fact that they have seen too much, beyond what the human soul can ordinarily endure. Nietzsche's abyss, where light turns into darkness. Nietzsche is a special case. He not only analyzed intelligence with reason, but also lived fully in the consequences intelligence brings. In Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote, "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." That saying, at first glance, a political warning, is in fact a confession. When an intelligent mind plunges into exposing the illusions of the world, the risk of its own destruction grows. Nietzsche plunged into the abyss of thought, where every moral foundation and belief was shattered under his relentless analysis. And in the end, that abyss swallowed him too, in a collapse of the spirit that lasted until his death. But Nietzsche was not only a victim. He left us a legacy. The awareness that high intelligence is not only a gift, but a burden to be managed. Intelligence is like a wild horse. If we can master it, it can take us farther than anyone. But if not, it will throw its rider down into the abyss. A prelude for the next journey. So, is intelligence truly an inescapable tragedy, or does it only become tragedy when humans lack an art of living to reconcile with their own capacity? We have only seen the dark side, the loneliness, the emptiness, the crises of geniuses. But to understand fully, we must go further into the dialogue between intelligence and society, between the individual and the collective, to see why those who see far are often rejected by the crowd, and why society, instead of embracing its geniuses, so often nails them to the cross. Intelligence and society, the dialogue, the one who sees too clearly, and the tragedy of exclusion. History offers no shortage of proof for a harsh law. The clearer one sees the truth, the easier one becomes an outcast. Remember Hypatia, the brilliant philosopher and mathematician of Alexandria. She was the symbol of free intellect, daring to question the rigid dogmas of religion and politics. But that lucidity made her a thorn in the side of power, and her end was a brutal death, torn apart by a fanatic mob in the middle of the street. Or Galileo, who dared to say that the earth was not the center of the universe. A truth obvious to us today, but an unforgivable insult to the church of his time. He was forced to recant, spending the rest of his life under house arrest. Alan Turing, the mind that helped Britain crack Nazi Germany's Enigma code, thereby shortening the Second World War, was condemned by his own country simply because he was homosexual. Turing did not die on the battlefield, but in solitude, biting into a poisoned apple like a modern tragedy. And more recently, Edward Snowden. When he saw the truth that the state was surveilling its citizens to an unimaginable degree, he chose to speak out. But the reward for that truth was a life in exile, far from homeland and family. Why does this law repeat itself? Why does society, instead of gratitude, turn its back on those who see further? Society and the herd instinct. To understand, we must return to a fundamental truth. Society exists thanks to collective stories. Those stories can be myth, religion, political ideals, or simply the truths agreed upon by the majority. They are like the skeleton holding the body of the community from falling apart. Nietzsche called this the herd instinct. It is this very instinct that binds people together, but also makes them afraid of those who dare to break the collective story. When Galileo said the earth revolves around the sun, he was not just publishing a scientific fact. He was touching the very core of collective belief, threatening social cohesion. Thus, the natural reaction of the collective was to resist him, not because he was wrong, but because he was right. Human beings, after all, do not live by truth, but by the stability of belief. And when an individual has enough intelligence to pierce through that belief, they become the enemy of order, consciousness, and compassion, the invisible burden. But intelligence not only puts humans at odds with society, it also opens another door, the capacity to feel the suffering of all humanity. Most people have a natural defense mechanism. When hearing news of war, poverty, or plague, they may feel sorrow for a moment, then quickly return to daily life. But with superior minds, that defense mechanism is fragile. They do not just know, they see the whole picture, the system, each link connecting one person's suffering to the unjust structures of society. Rachel Carson, the ecologist, saw environmental destruction very early. She wrote Silent Spring to warn the world, but that very clarity plunged her into sorrow, for she realized the devastation was immense and humanity was far from ready to stop. The highly intelligent are like people standing on a mountaintop, seeing the whole valley flooded, while the villagers below still busy themselves with harvest. That vision is both a privilege and a sentence. They suffer not only for themselves, but for all of humanity. The inner struggle, to live true or to live false. Another tragedy of the intelligent. They must choose between living true to their intellect or living false to blend in. If they stay silent, they keep outward peace, but inside are torn by having betrayed the truth they see. If they speak out, they lose jobs, lose community, even lose freedom or life. Nietzsche summed this up in one line: "He who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster." For when the highly intelligent devotee themselves to exposing society's errors, they risk being turned by the very anger and isolation into a new kind of monster, doubting all, resenting all, and in the end, losing themselves. In this tragedy, the choice is never easy. Snowden chose to live true and lost his homeland. Galileo chose to live false, recanting his words, yet the world still remembers him as a man ahead of his time. Two paths, two different tragedies. The philosophy of estrangement. Albert Camus once said, "The absurd is born of this confrontation between the human need and the unreasonable silence of the world." The highly intelligent are those who live entirely in that estrangement. They see the world operating on collective illusions, while they themselves can no longer believe in those illusions. The result is an ultimate loneliness, not physical loneliness, but existential loneliness. They may live among crowds, but as if from another planet. What others call common sense is to them mere illusion. What others accept unconditionally, they see as a game of power. That feeling of not belonging is the red thread running through the lives of many geniuses. Van Gogh once wrote to his brother, "I feel like a wanderer on this earth, with no place that truly belongs to me." And yet, perhaps it is precisely that estrangement which is the source of creativity. For only by not belonging do they gain enough distance to see the world differently. And that very different vision gives birth to knowledge and art. We see, intelligence is not only a personal burden, but also a conflict with society. The highly intelligent are often cast out for daring to speak the truth, for seeing too far, for refusing to accept collective illusions. They are lonely, torn between honesty and conformity, between living true and living false. And yet, the more important question lies ahead. Is there a way to turn all these contradictions into a source of creation? Is there a way to turn chaos into art, tragedy into rebirth? Turning chaos into creation, art as salvation. There is a paradoxical truth. Many geniuses passed through darkness, yet they did not let the darkness consume them. Instead, they turned pain into light, tragedy into art. Beethoven, the genius composer, was nearly robbed of the most precious thing for a musician, hearing. He was deaf. But instead of despairing, he listened to the world with another ear, the ear of the inner self. In that silence, he composed immortal works, such as the Ninth Symphony, where the Ode to Joy resounds not from outer sounds, but from the eternal music of the soul. Van Gogh, who found no solace in life, poured all his madness onto the canvas. Every stroke, every color was a struggle with the abyss, but also a bridge to eternal beauty. Ramanujan, the Indian mathematical genius, lived in poverty, illness, and cultural isolation, yet produced formulas that still astonish the world today. He said he saw them in dreams, as if numbers were the language of another realm. What is the common thread here? Pain itself, loneliness itself, the different vision itself, became raw material for creation. If part one showed us intelligence as a curse, and part two showed us the conflict between intelligence and society, then in part three, we begin to see a way out, creation as salvation. Creation as a form of spiritual rebirth. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." That image suggests a truth. Chaos is not only darkness, but also the source of creation. Ordinary people, when facing chaos, often try to avoid it, turning away, lulling themselves with simple beliefs. But the highly intelligent cannot. They are thrust into the storm of awareness, where there is no place to hide, and in that storm, there are only two paths: collapse, or transform the storm into music. Creation is rebirth. It is like using one's hands to mold the chaotic mass of the soul into tangible form: a symphony, a book, a painting, a scientific work. When chaos takes on form, it ceases to be vague darkness and becomes life energy. Here, creation is not just a product, but a way of being. It helps the mind regain balance, helps humans transform pain into value. As Van Gogh once wrote, "I put my heart and my soul into my work, and in the process have lost my mind." But without painting, he might have lost everything, a way of living with intelligence. The question arises, how can the highly intelligent exist, not merely by enduring, but by harmonizing? Some principles can be found. First, limit information. The intelligent brain often thirsts for knowledge, wishing to embrace the whole world. But no one can pour the entire ocean into a small vessel. Without selectivity, awareness will crush them. Philosophy here does not advise ignorance, but discernment, knowing what is worth letting the mind chew on and what must be left aside. Second, build a personal philosophy. Nietzsche called this creating values. When society's shared values collapse, the intelligent must construct a new framework, a set of rules, an ideology, an inner home to dwell in. Otherwise, they drift aimlessly in the void. Third, find a resonant community. The highly intelligent often feel lost, but lost does not mean absolutely alone. The world is vast and always has kindred souls. They may not be nearby, but the internet, books, and global knowledge can bring distant minds together. Finding one's intellectual tribe is among the strongest ways to escape isolation. Fourth, practice creation regularly. One need not become Van Gogh or Beethoven. Everyone can create in their own way: writing, music, painting, coding, design, philosophy. What matters is not the result, but the process of turning chaos into form. When creation becomes habit, the mind finds a constant exit. Nietzsche's message: learn to dance with chaos. In the depths of darkness, Nietzsche still left us a message. You must have chaos within you to give birth to a dancing star. What he meant is, do not try to destroy chaos. To destroy it is to destroy our very capacity for creation. Learn to dance with it, to turn obsessions into music, emptiness into space for the new, loneliness into freedom's room. The highly intelligent need not lower themselves to resemble the crowd. They only need to learn to befriend their own mind, like John Nash, who after years of battling hallucinations, finally learned to negotiate with the voices in his head, allowing him to keep doing mathematics. Chaos ceases to be the enemy and becomes the partner, and from that dialogue, creation arises. Intelligence, from burden to responsibility. We can draw a conclusion. Intelligence is not a fated tragedy. Tragedy comes only when we do not know how to carry it. High intelligence is like great wings. If we cannot control them, they will hurl us down in storms. But if we learn to fly, they can take us to heights the majority will never reach. Nietzsche called it the responsibility of the one who sees clearly. The highly intelligent are not only given the gift of insight, but also bear a responsibility to turn that piercing vision into creation, into contribution for humanity. We, who wrestle with intelligence, can learn this lesson. Instead of lamenting that we see too much, ask, what will we do with that vision? For in the end, intelligence is not a curse, but a responsibility of creation. And as Nietzsche once reminded, live dangerously. Let your life itself be a work of art. Intelligence is a gift, but also a burden. So what do you think? Does it make humans happier or more miserable? Leave your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to follow the channel so we can continue these philosophical dialogues together.